Today, I'm joined by leadership from the Hashgraph Group to talk about TrackTrace. Deepak, who is Regional Director of APAC, and Micha, who is Head of Engineering at the Hashgraph Group. For those not aware, in Hedera, the Hashgraph Group builds enterprise-grade infrastructure on top of Hedera, and one of their latest launches, TrackTrace, is designed to help companies meet one of the biggest upcoming regulatory shifts, which is the European Union's digital product passport, which, if I'm not mistaken, goes into facilitation here literally like next year, so 2027. So as I get started here, I'll do the low-hanging fruit question. And thank you, gentlemen, both so much for joining today. Why don't we start with Deepak, because you're new to this show. I've never had you on. So can you give us just a brief intro of yourself before we kick off?
Yep, that's great. And hi to all the viewers and you, Ryan. This is my first time, as you clearly said it. I'm from Bangalore, India. I've been in the IT business for almost 25 years, of which 22 years has been with Accenture, 2 years with, almost close to 2 years now with the Hashgraph Group. I take care of the enterprise programs and the businesses in the APAC region. That's me, and I love emerging technology.
Awesome. Thank you, Deepak. And Micha, if you could give another intro for yourself for our viewers here, and then we'll get kicked off.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. As you said, I'm Micha Roon. I'm the head of engineering. I like to say that my responsibility is to make sure we build the right things and we build the things right. And I'm a big enthusiast of decentralized technology and blockchain overall. Been in blockchain for the last 10 years now and in IT for the past 30. So yeah, pretty veteran.
Awesome. Measure twice and cut once. Sorry, I'm going to kick off here. And I think the big picture question here, and I'll provide some context, but for those not aware, TrackTrace was recently launched as part of the Hashgraph for Enterprise suite from the Hashgraph Group. For viewers hearing about TrackTrace for the first time, what is TrackTrace? What problems does it solve? And how does it differ from existing supply chain solutions?
Let me take this, and Mika, you can add the technical parts to it. So think of TrackTrace as a truth layer for supply chain that always needed but never had. Most enterprises today run supply chain on a patchwork of spreadsheets, PDFs, and legacy and enterprise ERPs. And when regulators or investors come and ask for proof points, that is when it all shambles, and they go back to data lakes and get all the data together and take 2 to 3 weeks to just put that together. And that is where we see a big gap, and we feel that TrackTrace can help solve this by giving you the provenance of your supply chain from the get-go till the end to the customer. But also, which is the most interesting thing today, is the circular supply chain. How do we then recycle it and then bring it back into the supply chain, which makes it very interesting for organizations to have.
So you're almost talking about like this model, or well, I guess this is like just me asking out of curiosity. So as more and more enterprise and institutions leverage TrackTrace, you then have obviously a lot of really interesting data about how enterprises and institutions are leveraging, or where they see the value add, and all of this other really cool stuff that you then kind of bring right back into TrackTrace, I would imagine, for all sorts of different reasons. So you're kind of like strengthening what you can do in and of itself. Maybe that's just kind of an out of the box assumption. But Micha, I would love if you could talk a little bit about from your stance too.
So TrackTrace solves the age-long problem of data interoperability. I remember working with EDI in the 90s, and it was a pain. And data interoperability has remained difficult, even to this day with the internet and a lot of standards. And TrackTrace is really trying to bring a solution or an answer to this problem to allow enterprises to anchor their data in a provable way, so you can prove that the data has been anchored correctly, and to share the pieces of the data that they need to share with the people that they need to share it with. So you will not share the same piece of data with your auditor than your customer, but it should be in the same way. And this is what TrackTrace allows.
So, go ahead.
Sorry, and the beauty is that it proves if this product was done ethically and sustainably. And that's where the magic is. What the data which Micha was just talking about is then allows the enterprises to then prove if this was done ethically and sustainably, and which the world needs today.
So I know you mentioned like full life cycle management, with which I think, kind of from inception to
Recycling.
the finish line. And this kind of leads in, you mentioned kind of ethically and sustainably. So a lot of global enterprises, as you mentioned, Deepak, kind of rely on ERP systems. For those that like acronyms, that's enterprise resource planning, that still rely on these fragmented or kind of outdated patchworks of things, the way that they work. So this does, I would imagine, make things, and I'm sure you maybe saw this through, your experience at Accenture, but this makes things like carbon footprint tracking or verifying, like, child labor, things like that, things that like are just a very, 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 very bad to have kind of happen in the life cycle. It makes it tracking that extremely difficult. So, we've had a ton of crazy things happen throughout the world over the past decade, and a lot of geopolitical stuff and instability. So, I mean, can you guys maybe touch base on why a solution like TrackTrace is so critical right now with what we're kind of seeing throughout the world?
Yes, I think proof is more important than ever. And even if it's a bit misunderstood, there is a big difference between data and proof. So data is just what you ascertain, what you tell people, but it doesn't need to be true. And very often it isn't. Whereas proof is, well, true, because by its nature, it is. And there are a few things that make data more provable or closer to the truth. Because it is timestamped by Hedera, there is no way to backdate something, to change the moment at which it was recorded. So it encourages you to record things in real time because the auditor will notice. Today, the auditor doesn't notice. You can, and this is often the case, run your operation throughout the year, and then 2 weeks before the auditor comes along, you scramble and you clean up everything and you doctor the books in such a way that it makes it look nice and proper, which is something that is not noticed today and will be noticed with systems in the future that provide proof instead of just data. So this is what we are trying to do. And this is where the digital identity component is so important, is because every agent, and I'm calling it an agent because it can be a human, but it can also be an IoT device, it can be a system, it can be anything. So each agent that participates in the process needs to have an identity and needs to sign its data. And we can prove not only the originator of the data, so who has sent the data, but we can also prove that at the moment of the data delivery, the agent was authorized to actually deliver the data. And I think this is very important because even if you do by some means find a back door and are able to deliver the data, if you do not deliver it through the right channels, it will be ignored because it is not provably correct. And this makes it much more secure and easier to verify. And as I said before, because of the selective disclosure parameter, you can also choose who gets to see which data point.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, obviously, enterprise and institutions have data that, certain data that needs to remain private, certain data that can kind of cross over and has some areas that obviously you want that transparency. And Micha, as you mentioned, when we see solutions like this, I think what we often forget is that there's all of these different areas of technology that tie in. So digital identity is a huge factor in people, autonomous agents, things like if you're tracking products from a lifecycle management standpoint, you certainly want to make sure if they're represented on chain somehow that they have a meaningful identity. There's all sorts of stuff that ties in. Deepak, the EU's, and we mentioned it in the intro, the Digital Product Passport, or DPP, regulation comes into force in 2027 for manufacturers in Asia and the Middle East, or I should say, or the Middle East exporting into Europe. What does missing that deadline, what would missing that deadline mean in practice, do you think?
Missing the 2027 deadline isn't just a compliance headache like anything which has happened in the past. It is actually missing the access to the market, which is basically the EU being the largest market or second largest market after US for the Asia Pac region. So if a textile manufacturer in Bangladesh or an electronic manufacturer or producer in Vietnam or Taiwan, or even a battery supplier in Middle East Asia, if their product doesn't carry a verifiable digital product passport, it simply doesn't allow them to sell in EU. That means that they are not allowed to come in and then make any money out of selling that here. That makes it very tricky for APAC and Middle East with their supply chain to have this multi-tiered, multi-geography, still largely paper-based, fragmented information or data sets. Either it's paper or in their ERP systems, which you don't trust. And hence, bringing all of them with the help of TrackTrace makes it very interesting and helps fix the DPP policy and regulations, and then give them that access to the market. So it's not when, it's now that you get ready for it to get into the process of being ready to give DPPs to your products which have been produced in this region.
Yeah, I think it's such a hugely valid point too, like where, and I did an interview with PwC that we just released that was a Hashgraph, or it's on Hashgraph TV right now, but that there was a lot of discussion around digital product passport, around TrackTrace, and around what it represented. And I know the use case there is like cacao, right?
Correct.
But we think about like, I think it's so crazy for me, and this is like a total sidebar, where like I've interviewed so many people, and the one thing I keep hearing is like, we are moving from a nice to have to a need to have with a lot of what we're talking about. We're just very kind of at the very forefront of talking about it, where all of these full lifecycle management supply chain solutions, as everything goes digital, there's going to have to be transparency around the operations and everything else. It just makes sense. There's so many initiatives going on globally. Micha, you mentioned decentralized identity. So I was digging into like some of the old or some of the other documentation, and I saw ultra wideband verification technology. And my understanding of that is it proves not only what happens or what happens during a production process, but also can kind of prove who or what was physically present when that happened. Why does a combination like that create a level of trust that maybe can't be replicated in other systems, where it's not just about what happened, or not just about what happened, but who or what was present, all sorts of different kind of things that are out there in the real world?
So ultra wideband is a cool technology. It is used for car keys and all kinds of nice applications. But in the industrial process, it definitely helps figuring out where different actors were at a certain point in time. The location is determined by ultra wideband, but the point in time is still determined by the blockchain. And so by integrating those, and we worked with our partner TrueSense on this, they provide the circuit boards and they created the integration. And it was typically for, industrial, but also everyday use cases. You can take the bus, for example, and the bus will know when you entered and when you exited, which is something that is very hard to do with a Bluetooth and very easy to do with ultra wideband. So these kind of applications are very nice, and it just goes to show that any technology can be integrated with blockchain and in certain cases add value to the industrial process. I think that's the learning out of it.
Yeah. So I come from like a super heavy manufacturing background, like before all the crypto stuff. And I remember when you deal with, so we built like spent storage casks for like dry and wet fuel. So like nuclear. And it's obviously very important to like make sure you're attesting to literally every material that goes into something. And most people probably don't realize this, but like we're in 2026 and obviously maybe something changed, but this was like maybe 7 or 8 years ago when I did this. The way that you were having traceability of like materials from steel mills or aluminum mills, literally they like write a batch and a lot number on a piece of steel. Like you can imagine like a gigantic sheet of steel and like there's handwritten lots. And then when something goes into an assembly, it's like a guy writing down an identifier number on a piece of paper, going over to a computer and then entering it in. There's so many things that can go wrong during that, all of these different processes. And you can imagine that's just one example of like, obviously a very critical industry where if something were to fail or a component were to fail, things don't end up bad or things don't end up too good. So I just think about how much room there is for innovation in so many different industries. Micha, you touched on a really important point here too, though, which is all of these, and I think both of you guys have touched on this, all these processes that exist from a kind of a compliance standpoint, how people keep records and bookkeeping and all this stuff, and how data needs to, I think you termed it as selective disclosure, Mia. Mm-hmm. Talk about that. Talk about the I mean, how do you draw the line technically, or how do you design for something that has that, I'll call it programmable privacy, for lack of better terms?
So TrackTrace at its core is a business process orchestration problem, because you mentioned processes a few times, and this is the core of the whole data gathering process, is that one thing needs to come after the other, and you need to be able to prove that you did those things in the right sequence and that you actually had the data before you delivered the data. So what we did is, because we needed a solution that works out of the box, we used an open source business process management system, which is JBPM, and we built our solution, our first solution, with that. But this does not mean that it's the only solution. So we wanted something that is very open, that is easy to integrate. And the way it works is, if you have a business process management solution like SAP uses Signavio, and so you can design your processes in Signavio and still integrate with TrackTrace. And then it is actually in your ERP system that you decide who gets access to what. So the only thing that gets anchored on chain is a URL to the data that has been provided. And because it's a URL, it can be associated with an access token. So if you have the access token that gives you access to all the attributes, then that's what you get. And if you have the access token that gives you access to only parts of the attribute, then, well, that's what you get. And so it is really defined by the holder of the data, which data you get access to, and they can change their mind. It's not something that is hewn in stone, and that once you have made the decision, you cannot go back, which is the image that you get very often when we talk about blockchain and, I need to be very careful because nothing can change once it has been done. This is not the case here. The logic is mostly off-chain. It's the proof that is on-chain. And the proof stays important whatever data you share. And it's the same thing, actually.
Well, it's the real world. I mean, anytime you're working at any sort of a business, if you're in procurement, you don't have the same level of access as the CEO of a company. So it's like you want that hierarchy of kind of control, and you want to be able to as real life things change, you want to be able to grant access based on things in the real world that change. So it's like, Deepak, I know you were going to go. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I have a direct follow-up to you after your comment.
Now, I mean, I just wanted to add to this, right? Because all of these were leads to what we have as GDPR, and one of the biggest clauses in that is right to be forgotten. And Misha just helped us answer that, right? Because you're not storing the data, but just a verifiable data in it. So, and it's in the immutable ledger. It addresses the most important thing when you talk about GDPR. Everyone shies away and runs away from DLT because you're thinking it's a immutable ledger, and if you store something, you can't then delete it, and all of those now gets answered by the way we have designed the track trace and how the verifiable data is anchored on the chain, but not your PII data and stuff like that. Makes it very, very unique and an important part of track trace.
Well, I think, one of the things that I take away from like tons of the recent like interviews, especially with the, like the big professional services firms like the PwCs and of the world, is that there really needs to be a level of meeting users where they're at. So like for me, whenever Micha is like, okay, well, this actually integrates right directly within enterprise or ERP systems within current organizations. So SAP or whatever somebody's using, because everybody, uses different stuff. That is absolutely huge, because then it's right within an enterprise and an institution's workflows, which you're not necessarily asking for. Hey, you have to like take a PhD course in blockchain and DLT to use the solution. It's literally already in what you're already using. So I guess the question I have for you, Deepak, is when enterprises evaluate adoption, how much of that barrier from or maybe this is for both you guys, how much do you guys see as a barrier for like technical know-how, like to onboard them, compared to what this represents, which is like almost seems more of plug and play? How important is it to add value to enterprise and institutional existing systems and not ask them to like rip and replace with something totally new?
Correct. And I'll be candid, right? The technical barrier is the least of the problem in the enterprise world. It's the change management and the organizational changes with process changes and stuff like that, which is what is the bigger challenge and not the technical challenge. Like what Misha was explaining, the BPM products which we use is so open and open standard, and it integrates so well that it doesn't matter if you know it or not, because you could just design a business process and then apply it and you'll be ready. And all it needs is then anchoring it on the chain and bringing it well when it's needed and selectively given to tier 1 to tier 5 partners in the entire ecosystem. The bigger thing which needs to be managed is the change management, the organizational behavior, which takes a lot more time than the technical barrier. Misha, if you want to add.
Yes. So the process digitization is the real hurdle here. And I first heard of business process management systems 25 years ago, and still today, so many processes are not digitized, and it works just because people know how it's meant to work. And I know that once I've done this, I need to send an email to this guy, and if they're on vacation, I need to send an email to this other guy who
Tribal
replaces
knowledge.
them. Exactly, but it's not encoded anywhere. And we can manage that to a degree. So we can create systems that are very open and that just collect the data when it comes in. But if you want something that is really auditable, well, then you need this organizational change that Deepak mentioned and go through a process digitization process, which is something that would benefit a lot of organizations in any case. So we're just working with a metal producer in Europe, and they have some digitization that has been done. And well, it makes it pretty easy to integrate with them, and they take the opportunity to improve their process designs. But yeah, that's the biggest hurdle, I would say.
So I know, there's, I mentioned, I think at the beginning of this, that through Hashgraph Group, there's obviously the Hashgraph for Enterprise, and there's a lot of different products coming together here. And I think we've alluded to it a little bit. So like even just looking down through here, ID Trust, TrackTrace, EcoGuard, Asset Guard, Transact, Hashcare. We're headed towards a society where all of these enterprises and institutions are fully digitized. And I know that we're chipping away at the iceberg. So I guess the question that I have is like, and this might be just kind of like a bigger picture question, but from your guys' opinions, what does adopting a full like trust infrastructure stack through the Hashgraph Group, like if an enterprise or institution came in, they're like, hey, we want to integrate everything and digitize all of our processes. I guess the question I'm asking is like, what do you think that would mean for an enterprise's long-term competitive positioning versus what other enterprises or institutions, like the level of integration that they are comfortable with at this point in time?
So if you look at all enterprises, they started this digital transformation, and I remember this doing it in my previous company about 15 years ago, right? So everyone were saying it's a digital transformation, and you did with digitizing, going from a paperless, going to paperless, right? And then, like what Misha was saying, converting your business processes and becoming more robust in a way. Now, the biggest problem with the world, and even with whatever the recent situation has been, is transparency and trust. So if I am a, a manufacturer, or even take what happened in COVID as an example, right? So you didn't know exactly where the uh, where the products were in the entire global supply chain. It was very opaque. You didn't know where the vaccines were. You tried to figure out, and it was very tough. And companies had no visibility beyond tier one suppliers. Now we are talking about going to the nth level till tier five, and also figuring out how much of carbon footprint the tier five supplier has, so you can backtrace and say what is your total footprint by using a certain raw material which came from a tier five supplier. So those are the things which I think is being now asked by the board. Is this ethical? Where does this product actually come from? Have you used forced or child labor while producing this, directly or indirectly? And then finally, what is the total carbon footprint? And to answer all of these, which board and the entire sustainability ecosystem is asking, can be addressed by all the six products which you mentioned. And each of them are designed in a way to make sure that it integrates well and helps you answer them and bring the trust and transparency to the entire way of working for an enterprise. And that's where the strength of these well curated and selected products which we have brought in the suite helps for each organization.
Yeah, we are seeing 1000% just so many areas of technology converge, and like I know for me, I'm overwhelmed looking at it on a daily basis, like trying to keep up with what's going on. Whether it's Monday it's autonomous agents, and Tuesday it's identity, and Wednesday it's tokenization. Like there's all sorts of things that come into play. But you brought up a really interesting point, which I think that like for those that are in like those that had any sort of supply chain areas within their companies at all, and you go back to 2020 or 2021, I remember you used to be able to basically project, let's say like things are shipping from China to the US. You used to be able to project around 6 weeks of a lead time for like big valves or things like that. I remember over COVID in 2020 and 2021, I mean, like Honeywell is a good example. Like Honeywell is a gigantic company, huge manufacturer of valves and all sorts of things. I remember literally being on the phone with customer service and them and talking to like management, being like, and them being like, we cannot give you any sort of a lead time. We have no idea when things are going to get there. So we look at it from that perspective as far as like that level of uncertainty, but we don't even look at it as all the downstream effects. Okay, well, what's being built? Where is what's being built shipping? Do they have some sort of an outage scheduled at a plant because they expect this equipment to be there? And it's like, one thing is late affects all these downstream things. And I think we are headed towards a future where at the very bare minimum, we can mitigate that and know exactly where something is, why something is, and all the other things that come along with it. In the note of kind of gigantic enterprise and supply chain, FedEx recently joined the Hedera Council to help advance trusted digital infrastructure for global supply chains. I guess as a broad question here, what does an organization like FedEx signal to other global enterprises? So when a company of that scale joins or participates in the governance layer of Hedera, the network, and the infrastructure of Hedera, TrackTrace is built on top of that and can interoperate with that. What does that signal for you guys? What type of opportunity does that open up for you guys as well?
So if I had $1 for every time a person asked me a question, is DLT ready for enterprises, I would have been a millionaire by now. And FedEx joining our council just answers that question loud and clear, that the organizations need a DLT for the new way of working now, which we are now seeing the global. There is glocalization is what I say. There is global and then there is local, both getting added. And the only way you could now confidently signal that we have that infrastructure which is mature, secure, and neutral to manage the entire enterprise operations is through DLT. And FedEx joining us, which is the major logistic player for the world, says that bringing a DLT to it and then enabling other organizations which we to adopt and then bring in the GS1 standards and all the other logistics and supply chain standards through FedEx would be a great opportunity. And then joining us is really saying that there is a great future for DLT in enterprises, and FedEx could be that key to unlock them and easily adopt to this technology.
Micha, I love your thoughts. Go ahead,
Yeah,
sir.
I think that FedEx is a perfect example of interoperability between enterprises because, well, it's a logistics player. So what logistics does is creating a link between people. And that is how I see what DLT does for data. What DLT does for data is make it available to multiple actors in a trustworthy manner. And we transition from a mindset of look at my database, it probably contains correct data, to look at my data point, it has been anchored on chain and it has been signed by me, and hence you can trust it because I cannot fake it. And the recognition from a player like FedEx that this is something important in the future, I think is huge because it will embolden others to say, oh, okay, they do it, we have to do it too. And it's a very important signal. And I really hope that in the future we will live in a world where when you scan a QR code on the new shirt that you bought, you will not get to a vanilla website that says we are green, trust us, we are honest, but to a verified web page with journalists signing the report saying, I have investigated them and I couldn't find anything fishy.
Yeah, I always like reading the back of I don't read all ingredient labels, but I like when I read the back of ingredient labels and I see like natural flavors. Like you could interpret, one could interpret that ingredient as many things. But no, I think that, we are probably headed towards, and I don't, again, I think it's going to be maybe less of a nice to have and more of a need to have or mandated to have, especially given all the green, the ESG stuff coming. Like we should be able to look and see where something came from. I mean, so my wife was telling, this is a total sidebar. My wife was telling me last night, there's this place that sells eggs, or there's a company that sells eggs, and you go to the grocery store and it's one of the brands. And she was like, on the box or the carton of eggs, it says like, free roaming grass fed hens or whatever it says. She was telling me like there's a guy or a lady right next to the farm where this place is, and she's like, they film every day and like they never see the hens outside, and like it's just like it's just a total sidebar, because I think like I often wonder like what's the level of like what standards do people have to meet to put things on or to say certain things, like, so I don't know. Anyways, I could go down the rabbit hole there forever, but from both of your guys' advantage points across these markets, and I know Deepak, you've got probably a unique viewpoint across APAC, and Micha, especially given your decade of experience in this space, and just I guess the question that I have is where are we seeing real momentum right now around digital product passport, around ESG adoption? Are there particular industries or regions that are moving faster than others?
The momentum is real and it's accelerating, but it's not uniform, right? For example, even with the DPP in the EU region, it's looking at electronics and battery as the first wave to be adopting into it, and that signal passes through and then comes to APAC too. So the ones which we see a lot more is the textiles and the apparel in India, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. Then you see electronics, which is also what DPP in EU regulates to be first given this. So electronics and batteries out of South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and other Southeast Asian countries are becoming real. And then you go in and with right now, whatever is happening with construction materials and petrochemicals coming from the Gulf region is also very important now where it's coming from. So all of these are real and then making it through. And then the DPP is accelerating that each of these regions and manufacturers trying to adopt and create a DPP so that they can access the market and then sell to this market. Coming to your second part of your question, from an ESG perspective, we are seeing a lot more traction in India, in Philippines, and all those places where the government is uh, making sure that there are carbon banks and carbon registries being created in the region, which then can do two things. One, the regulated market and the voluntary market, address the both of them in a way that you don't lose out. And one of the interesting things which we do with Maharashtra, state of Maharashtra in India, is where the carbon credits which we get and the profits you make out of it is then supporting the backward classes and below poverty people, right? So the entire organization is using this opportunity, which you couldn't have thought through, that these carbon credits could help the region of the society which needs it the most, and that is where it then trickles down to. And DLT is helping us first make sure that there's no greenwashing, and second, whatever is coming out of the carbon credits being sold is then pumped into the society for the betterment of the society. So those are a few interesting ones. And even in Philippines, there are these coconut farms which now produce a lot of carbon credits, but the farmers are not getting benefit. And now we have this organization called Confed, which is helping ensure that once you sell the carbon credits, the real profit then goes to the farmer so that they can benefit from it. So those are a few things which are actually making waves in this part of the world.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, I think that I did an interview last week with I know so Sealcoin, and we were talking about even just like what's about to happen as far as like, okay, as people go solar, like right now when people have excess energy, it basically just goes back to your electric company, and then they do whatever they want. But like, I think what I hear, which is I think a little bit refreshing, is like there's a lot of things that are universally true for a lot of people, and we are kind of kept out of the value loop. Like that value loop is like not democratized right now. It's like owned by whoever owns it. But I think that's awesome to hear, that especially that there's going to be kind of more activity and more ability to attest for things like carbon credits and all this other stuff. it just makes sense. Like if farmers are contributing to that meaningful data, I guess I would say, or that meaningful information, obviously they should be put back into the value loop too, which I think is awesome. But Micha, I would love maybe just from your stance, if you have any thoughts on like where you're seeing the most adoption right now for things like TrackTrace, et cetera, et cetera.
So regulation in Europe is the biggest driver right now. People see it as a necessity in order to access the market, so that there is must have instead of nice to have. What the regulator hasn't caught up on is the need for proof yet and the double spend problem. So it's everybody in blockchain knows the double spend problem. You don't want me to spend my coin with you and Deepak. But this is also true with certified papers. So if I have a certificate that proves that my ton of steel is indeed renewable, you don't want me to apply the same certificate to another ton of steel. And public blockchains are the only way to solve this market-wide double spend problem. No private chain can do that because it is private and because it is closed. So I think that is where we have a big role to play. And then also with the integration of carbon credits that Deepak mentioned, these are tokenized. And because we tokenize also the production, or we can tokenize the production, it's pretty easy to integrate these things because it's the same technology. We have a good control. So I think this will give us a lot of momentum. Maybe not right now because there are a lot of other problems to be solved before we tackle these, but we will just be in a better standing as we have the solutions to a broader range of problems that are cross-organizational, whereas the private players provide solution to just your organization or the organization that have the same supplier. But yeah, that's not enough.
That's super interesting. Like, so I haven't ever thought of it that way. So I guess as a note to that, I would love if like my health data if we could eliminate the double spend problem from my health data. Because every time you go to a new doctor, you have to give them all the information that you already gave the other doctor you gave. And it's like, it's really interesting to think. So even when you're thinking of like, okay, I have this attestation for this data, and once it gets, I mean, it may be in one example, once it gets almost consumed into this example, because we were headed towards this kind of internet of value, you wouldn't want that same exact thing to be able to be consumed somewhere else, because then it essentially nullifies the, yeah, it's really, really interesting to me. I've never thought of it that way outside of kind of the payments landscape. So yeah, I thought that's awesome. I think I mentioned it a couple of times during this as we ramp down here, but we are obviously at kind of the dawn of all of these different areas of technology converging. So Agentic AI and DID and decentralized identity, obviously distributed ledger and blockchain. But all this stuff is coming into kind of these different compliance workflows. What does the logistical or supply chain infrastructure of the future look like to you guys? And what signals, I guess from TrackTrace in particular, what signals would tell you that TrackTrace has moved from a compliance tool or what people are integrating right now to kind of like industry, like foundational infrastructure?
The future I see in THG, which we are actively building, is the one where supply chain is largely self-audited with the help of DLT and Agentic AIs in it, right? So what it means is basically Agentic AI monitors and flags any anomalies, decentralized identities, verify who touched the data and the product, and then finally we anchor all of those into an immutable ledger, and that only an authorized party can access it in real time. So there is no more manual reporting, filling, no month end reconciliation theatrics, just continuous verifiable truth given to the organizations and people world over. And that is what we are trying to build an agentic AI with its workflow automation and monitoring and alerting brings that to our TrackTrace and our products which we are building, which are there, right? So that's where I see the future of the supply chain coming to with help of all these technologies.
It seems like that we're heading towards a future where like a lot of processes that historically require a lot of overhead just kind of get streamlined. Like it's almost like an exercise in like we're crawling towards, which is nice, eliminating redundancies, because there are, I forget if it was Micha or Deepak, one of you guys mentioned, I think it was Micha, you said you sometimes in these traditional enterprise or institutions, it's like, okay, I know when I do this, I have to email this person. And then once that person gets the email, they know they have to walk down and talk to Sally, and Sally does, like, all of these processes that are tribal knowledge, like, get digitized. And yeah. But Micha, can you talk a little bit about, how you see all of this stuff converging and what you think that means for TrackTrace?
Sure. So TrackTrace was imagined as a protocol first and foremost, and the building blocks of this protocol are open source, really, and open knowledge. And I think I will really consider this to have had a lot of impact once we have the first competing product for it. So once somebody else picks up and says, "Ooh, that's a great idea. Let's build the same thing. Let's build something that is competing or complementing even it." So building a reporting tool on top of TrackTrace that we haven't thought of, or building something that integrates with it. Because the nice thing about it is that it being a protocol, there's nothing we can do to prevent this from happening. And well, this is from a business point of view, this might be a bad thing, but for me, from a technologist point of view, this is a great thing to be able to have impact in the industry. And I think there will never be an industry with a winner takes all. Like even in social media, there are multiple players. So it is important to create an ecosystem where there are multiple players, and it just makes the pie bigger. And it's always good to have a piece of a bigger pie.
Yeah, I've said this before, if I wasn't doing interviews, if I knew how to code, if I was a developer, I would literally build the most straightforward like business use case that leverage blockchain. I'd be like, I'm solving for KYC, or I'm solving like something that is like maybe not on the surface level sexy, and maybe that I don't have to like go and become like a Twitter personality, like literally just something that solves a problem for a business. So I think, Micha, what you said is super interesting, is like anybody can go and build and leverage TrackTrace right now, build on top of it, which I think is like super valuable. I mean, we need solutions, I think. And by the way, Deepak, I have globalization here because I'm definitely going to use that at some point. But I like saying co-opetition too. Like, I think that obviously you have cooperation and then you have competition, but I think that what drives this industry forward is like a little bit of a mixture of both. So I'm excited to see what gets built on top. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything, guys, as we close out here, but do you guys have any closing statements or forward-looking statements? Deepak, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Micha, and then we'll end.
As we spoke about Hashgraph for Enterprise Suite, and like I mentioned before, it is perfectly curated and handpicked to go build these 6 amazing products, which can help enterprises adopt and use the power of DLT to ensure that it actually solves real world problems. Is what we are trying to do. And like what Misha just said, you could build on top of it or use it to accelerate and get to and then bring the speed to market, so you don't spend years together just building it. Now you could use one of these products, get to market in weeks, if not months, and then start seeing the value of DLT technologies bringing to your business. And that is what we are doing. And then finally, on top of it, we are making sure that there are agentic AIs which are now incorporated into it to bring in that automation and that intelligence which you need, so that you reap out of it instead of doing those mundane manual labor work, which we want to avoid in
Yeah,
this.
no, I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I wanted to mention the same thing that you just said, Deepak. Though is like, okay, all of this is built, and I think like I don't know. I feel like if I was a builder or developer right now coming into blockchain and distributed ledger in 2026, like I look back to 2016 and 17, and I'm like, I didn't see 95% of the stuff that's here right now wasn't there. 95% of the tools and the support and the open sourcing of products to build on top of. Like, there's so much. It's almost like an amusement park right now for a builder, I would imagine. It's like, I'm not going to go in and just well, maybe people do, and certainly we want to cultivate people that want to build whatever they want to build. But if I see stuff that I can just build on top of, and like I can just take something and then I have a good foundation and then I can run with it down a specific way. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like it's almost like a little bit spoiled in a way where, like, if you're a builder, there's so much you can build on top of what's already, there's been a lot of great work already. But Micha, as we close out here, closing statements from you, sir, and appreciate you guys joining us today once again.
Yeah, in the past year or so, I felt really vindicated in the pursuit of technology because the European Union is rolling out their digital identity, so is Switzerland. So in less than a year, there will be 500 million digital identities out there. And everybody does agree at some point that, well, DLT is important technology and tokenization is important, etc. So from this point of view, seeing that everybody kind of agrees that what we've built makes sense, I'm very hopeful for the future that we'll be able to monetize it and to create adoption.
Well, I definitely want to thank both you gentlemen for joining us today, and I'll make sure that we do the round robin here for you guys can go to hashgraphtackgroup.com, and obviously products are within here, and you can look down through the Hashgraph for Enterprise Suite, all 6, as Deepak mentioned. There's also a nice brochure of TrackTrace if you guys are interested in learning more. And as Micha mentioned, you can build and leverage TrackTrace and build on top of it and go down different directions and everything else. At Hashgraph Group on X and at the _Hashgraph for the Hashgraph Association. We want to thank the Hashgraph Association for helping us to put these together. Please give Genfinity a follow on X, and you can also go to genfinity.io to check out all of the articles. This interview will be up there as well. Deepak and Micha, thank you so much for joining today.